Hello there to everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the second in the series of webinars on the associated incorporations regulations. Delighted to, of course, pay tribute to the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting. In our case, it's the Turrbal and the Yugara people as the First Nations owners of these beautiful lands where QUT now stands. And we pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. And QUT acknowledges the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. So today we are going to be chaired with distinction by my colleague Linda Lavarch. And just briefly, because I believe most of you would know Linda, but Linda's a long-term committee member with us on our advisory board here at ACPNS, formerly a research fellow with us in the centre, but also, of course, well known as the former Minister for Justice and Attorney General for Queensland, and well fitted to talk about this non-profit area with roles that include a whole range of board positions in the non-profit sphere, but also as chair of the National Not-for-Profit Reform Council some time ago. So I'll hand over to you, Linda, to proceed with our day.
Thank you, Wendy, and can I say a warm welcome to everyone today for our second webinar series to talk about and explore the consultation papers put out by the Department of Justice and Attorney General through the Office of Regulatory Policy. Today's seminar is in relation to discussion paper number 2, disclosure of remuneration, and we have 3 wonderful speakers today who will do presentations in relation to this area that is the Department or the Office of Regulatory Policy is considering what the regulation should look like. Before I introduce our speakers for today, can I let you know that the webinar is being recorded, so I know we'll be all very careful about what we say and what we text. The outline for today's webinar is that we'll hear from Emeritus Professor Myles McGregor-Lowndes, who will give us some background as to what has transpired to date that precipitates putting out the consultation paper. And then we'll be hearing from Hannah Hiscox, who I'll introduce just before her presentation, who's a partner at Grant Thornton, and we'll also be hearing from Dr. Jackie Bessington, who's an associate lecturer here at QUT in the Faculty of Business and Law. We've broken up the issues that are discussed or contained in the consultation paper into 5 parts. After each presentation on those parts, there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions. What would be really good is if you could put your question into the chat box, the Zoom chat box, and then we can pop those questions up. And we've got with us today Martin Scott and David McCarsell from the Office of Regulatory Policy to help us answer those questions, but also hear what the issues are for participants in today's webinar. We will also be asking some very targeted questions. The questions about some details are canvassed in the consultation paper. So through the poll facility in Zoom, we formulated those questions, and we ask that I'll let you know when the polls will go up. You'll see a screen with the question and some multiple choice answers. If you could complete the poll, that would be great and give us an idea of what people are thinking. I think that's all for my introductions today. So I'm going to hand over to Myles now, who will give us the background. But before we do, let's try a mock poll. So we've got an introduction question that says, I'm attending in the capacity of, and gives you a choice from in what capacity you're attending. If you could complete that. So as the polls come up, they'll come up like that screen with the question, and if you just tick the box that best appeals to you, we'll be very grateful. Okay, Myles, over to you. If you could just fill us in on the background, where this all has emanated from, and set the scene for today.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's good to be with you today. In 2020, the Parliament passed amendments to the Act, the legislation, which went through Parliament. Then COVID struck. The department was planning to consult with the sector and the Queensland public on what the regulations to the Act should be and how they should be crafted. That was not possible during COVID. So here we are 2 years later, and they are now consulting. So this is not about the provisions of the Act. This is about the regulations which accompany the Act. So if you're not happy with the Act, at the moment it's too bad, too sad. You'll have to wait for the next round of legislative amendments. This is only in respect of the regulations, and there are three consultation papers that they've put out. And it might be handy if you have consultation paper 2 open on your screen or in hard copy to follow the bouncing ball as we go through them sequentially. Now, I just want to make a couple of points about this. I think this consultation paper about remuneration will probably be, and its disclosure, will probably be the most controversial and probably generate the most submissions. As we know out there, the public believe, and many members of associations believe that everything should be done by volunteers, that everything happens seamlessly, and that people can give, and give. And even staff should be volunteers. And if you pay them a pittance. But that view is changing. More and more company directors in non-profit organisations are being paid, and it's been growing quite a bit over the last decade. And the argument which is starting to take root, particularly on boards and committees of management, is that they need to be diverse and they need to be representative of the general demographics. Too often the comment is made that management committees and boards of non-profits are full of pale, male, stale and old people such as myself, and a bit of diversity would be good. But how do you get that diversity if those people are full-time in the workforce and can't take time off or have full-time home caring duties at night when meetings occur? Payment may be a solution to achieving greater diversity on boards and management committees if that's required. The other issue that I just alert you to is it's going to be interesting to find where the department lobs with what is a minor benefit. So if management committee members get, of say a licensed club, get $1,000 free bar tab to drink with their mates to find out what's going on and what they'd like to do, that's probably a benefit in most people's view. Is a management committee member who serves at the canteen at the sporting body field, and if they have a free hamburger and a free can of soft drink, is that a benefit that's got to be reported? If you're at a management committee meeting and it's after work and the association pays for a meal for you to have prior to the all have a meal together before the management committee, is that a benefit? Does that have to be reported? Is a glass of water that you get at the management committee meeting a benefit? So all that's got to be sorted out of where on the scale does disclosure cut in. The final thing I'd like to mention is that we know from studies in for-profit companies and listed for-profit companies, when CEOs and senior management have had their remuneration details disclosed in annual reports of listed companies, generally their wages, their salaries and their packages go up. Everybody's goes up. That is because there's transparency of who's getting what, and it's easier for people to argue that they need more remuneration or else they'll move. So it'll be interesting to see whether this means for those incorporated associations that employ staff, senior staff, whether there will be a general movement up in their salary packages. So that's all from me, Linda. Over to Hannah.
Great, thanks
everyone online today. We're very fortunate to have Hannah presenting. Hannah Hiscox is a partner, audit and assurance at Grant Thornton Australia, based here in Brisbane. She has over 20 years experience in the audit and assurance department at Grant Thornton. Hannah focuses solely on the not-for-profit sector and is a specialist in the industry, as her knowledge and experience allows her to quickly identify issues and particular audit requirements and share her industry insights. Hannah is also an ACP&S alumni and is here today to share her insights into the remuneration and benefit disclosure obligations. Thank you, Hannah.
No, thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here today, and definitely preferable to auditing at the moment. It's a little bit hectic, as you'd appreciate. I'd just like to echo, firstly, I guess, Myles's comments that I expect this will be a topic of keen interest, and anecdotally from when I attend board and committee meetings, if they are already disclosing K&P compensation or even just bios, anything that is of personal interest definitely generates a lot of discussion and definitely an appetite, I think, from users for some of this information. And we've seen that play out for a long time in listed companies with their remuneration reports, but more recently with the removal of special purpose financial reports and the ACNC stepping into this space as well, it's going to become much more common across sectors and different sizes of companies. So the challenge with that, of course, is how do we get this greater transparency and accountability without it becoming too prescriptive or exhaustive, and how to strike that balance, which is what the consultation paper is helping to tease out. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Wendy. All of this is, I guess, the driver for Section 70D, and what it is required to prescribe what it says the regulation needs to prescribe is what the details of the remuneration and benefits must be disclosed and how those will be presented to the AGM. And also it talks about what will happen when there's no remuneration and benefits to disclose, which for a lot of smaller associations will be a really common situation as well. When we're talking about this, I guess the boundary is to work out who you're going to capture it for. And so there's two categories and then relatives of those categories that we need to consider. That's the members of the management committee, a senior staff member who is a decision maker in the association, and then a relative of either of those categories of person, which is a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a child, or a grandparent. The components of remuneration are relatively straightforward. It's things like salaries and wages, allowances, commissions and rewards like bonuses. And what Section 70D also tells us is that it excludes the reimbursement of out-of-pocket expenses from that definition, which will be a really good time saver in having to track that kind of information. What is a little more complex is the component of benefits. And so you can see there's quite a long list on the screen there. But it will include things like termination and post-employment benefits, the use of associations' property or services for private benefit, payment of a various number of things like rental expenses, utilities, education fees, personal travel. But probably maybe more common, I would think, in the association sector is membership fees or waiver of membership fees, and other benefits from related party transactions such as discounts on events that the association may hold. And so I guess as a final observation before we move on to the Q&A is that from a practical point of view, it's mostly going to, the practical implication for this is how do you capture this and how do you continually monitor this situation so that you can later disclose that to your members and also address the subjectivity that comes in when you're defining who your senior staff may be for your association. But on that note, I'll hand back to you, Linda.
At this point, if there's any questions of Hannah or in general, would you be able to type those into the chat? Myles will monitor them. We can either have Hannah or David or Martin from the Office of Regulatory Policy to answer those questions. While you're thinking about your questions, Wendy, would you like to put up our first poll? Mm-hmm. Our first poll question is, broadly, are there any other things that might be considered remuneration or benefits that are not listed? So going back to Hannah's slide on the benefits, we have to just go back to the previous slide. If you have a look there, are there other things that you can think of that aren't in that list at all? Thank you, everyone, for move on to the next part of today's webinar. And it's my great honour to introduce to everyone Dr. Jackie Bessington. Now, Jackie's a researcher and associate lecturer here at QUT, and her research interests are corporate governance, business ethics and boards of directors. Jackie did her research masters here in 2015 and developed a director financial literacy competency framework for directors serving boards in Australia, including the governing bodies of non-profit organisations. She's also has over 20 years experience on non-profit boards at both the director level and chair of the board level. Jackie has extensive professional experience in information governance law, policy and practice in the public and not-for-profit and commercial sectors. And we're very fortunate to have you here to share your knowledge and thoughts about how these regulations should be drafted. So thank you, Jackie.
All right, thank you. I guess I'll start by sort of building on that idea of the fundamental tensions that are part of the proposed individualisation versus aggregation reporting of remuneration and benefits. So it's a matter of really balancing transparency and protection of privacy and ensuring that reporting is not too intrusive. While at the same time, in terms of making sure there's not too much of a regulatory burden, conform or fits within the rules of the organisation, and also thinking about the trust of the organisation and the sector more broadly as well. So they're sort of underpinning tensions in the whole debate or proposals. So in terms of looking at, well, what does it involve? Hannah's already worked through basically the scope. So we're focusing on remuneration here, putting the benefits to the side. The important thing to note is that what's being proposed or being considered is about a minimum. So that's not saying people can't disclose more, but not less. Bearing in mind that increasingly disclosure is the norm. So there is that, I guess, that societal pressure as well operating. It does cover management committee, senior staff and relatives, but I've got staff there as a bit of a reminder that when it comes to incorporated associations, roles are often blurred. And when you're doing things concurrently, unpacking roles can be quite a challenge. So if I could just move this. So looking at the individualised aspect, so this is about reporting specific remuneration paid to individuals in those roles. Similar to what's already out there in publicly listed companies and also the public sector and then with the charities as well. So here we've got an example where it's in the period, the individuals identified their role and the amount, okay, and in particular whether they're a management committee or senior staff. Whereas if you look at the aggregated level, you lose that granularity, so you can't see proportionate remuneration being paid to individuals, but it's broken down by categories. So here we have, it's just essentially a statement that's reported to the association, similar to what you sort of get at the large charities at the moment. So just a lump sum figure for each category and its entirety as well. So they're the key things that are being proposed.
So I think at this stage it's great to, give everyone the opportunity to ask some questions, because this is a really critical point, isn't it? Whether to the requirement through the regulation will be to report the individual amounts, or should it be an aggregate amount? David or Martin, did you want to add anything at this stage at all, of what sort of feedback you're looking for?
I think we anticipate a pretty wide range of views on this one, or at least a poll of views. But I guess the point we would make, and we've made it in the discussion paper, is that it is a minimum standard. From that perspective, if you go aggregate, at least you're not holding everybody to that higher standard. They have the option to come up to that standard if they want to. However, as also the discussion paper doesn't make a recommendation on this one, because we appreciate it's something of a contentious issue, and we'll be guided by submissions as to what we recommend to the Attorney General.
Thank you, Martin. If anyone's got any questions, don't forget to put it in the chat box, but it might be an opportunity now to go to our third question, poll number 3, which is, should disclosure of salary, wages, bonuses, should be on an aggregate basis or an individualised basis? So if you could answer that question, that would be really helpful in the feedback.
Sorry, just with this poll, if we say yes, is that yes to aggregate or yes to individualised?
That's a good question.
Aggregate. Yes to aggregate.
Okay.
Okay, we'll make it aggregate, yes. We were so eager to ask the questions.
I didn't even pick that up.
Okay, so that's a majority favour a minimum reporting on an aggregate basis.
Next poll.
The next poll is, if aggregated, is there a view that bonuses and rewards should nevertheless be disclosed on an individualised basis, given these are likely to be of significant interest to the association's members? So the yes is that it will be disclosed on an individual basis when we're talking about bonuses and rewards, or no, that they all form part of the aggregate number disclosure.
Seems to be our total normally.
Yes, great, thank you. It's sort of pretty evenly split there. Myles will collate all of the poll information and provide that to David and Martin as well. So are there any questions at this stage before Jackie moves on with her next section?
Comments rather than questions.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so Jackie, back to you.
Yeah, back to me. Okay, so this is, we're looking now more specifically at benefits, which is what Hannah ran through. So I guess the key message there was that benefits can take many forms, and they're not always that straightforward, and can be a bit ad hoc in the nature in which they are given. So they can be difficult to identify, record, and then calculate for the purposes of disclosure. And you can sort of get a sense of that by looking at the relevant accounting standard. So in terms of what they cover, as I said, Hannah's already run through those, but in terms of identifying when there's a a benefit personal versus not personal can be quite complex, which for some incorporated associations without the appropriate systems in place, it could be quite a challenge. So again, it sets the minimum, or the aim is the regulation will set the minimum, covers the benefits for the same group, bearing in mind the blurring of lines. And so while organisations can implement their own controls, it can be, it also excludes benefits that you would receive as a member of the association anyway. One thing that's being proposed is the idea of disclosure thresholds for benefits, which could possibly be more readily quantified. So again, looking at that individualised versus aggregated question in terms of disclosure, whether disclosure is at the specific individual level, which would potentially require a lot of administrative work, particularly where it's difficult to identify and draw lines between what is a benefit and what is not. And identifying particular members, it could become quite problematic, or it could be a potential in terms of accountability and transparency. So that, again, that tension is evident. So you can see some examples there, but there's a level of categorisation there, so it's not specific. In terms of aggregation, just a simple lump sum, less administrative burden, but bearing in mind to get a lump sum, you still have to do some identification, reporting and calculations to get there. And could potentially be more prone to exploitation as well. So we've got the aggregated example there where it's just a total figure in benefits.
Thank you, Jackie. Again, if there's any questions, pop them in the chat, but we do have another poll, Wendy, that we can put up in the meantime just to get some feedback about the reporting of benefits in the individual manner referred to above. So do you agree that they should be individualised as set out in the slide? So the answer yes will be yes to individualised manner. The no will be to aggregate. With that one though, if you have answered no, I know I just said that no would mean the aggregate, but if you could, are there other options that you could also, options you're thinking of that might be different from individualised or aggregate that could be considered? Okay, and the next poll is this question about what the threshold should be for that disclosure. For the regulation, you're looking at...
Explain thresholds further. Yeah, so the idea is that you would report once a particular threshold had been met, which meant you have to have some calculations behind that to work that out. But it could also signal that, say, for example, the threshold was 1,000, then UBeauty will aim for 1,000 in a bit like the tax threshold for personal claims, where suddenly you've got a benchmark to say you can spend up to $1,000 before you have to disclose, and how we actually
and that would be on an individual basis.
That's right. So
we've got
12 members on our committee, great, we've got $12,000 we can spend, or up to 12,000 each.
So just to clarify, so this is the threshold for one person, not the aggregate threshold.
Well, it's how it's calculated. So if the threshold was per person versus entirely, then you've got the potential for some sort of gaming behaviour going on.
I meant for the poll question.
The poll question is for individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah, so we're just gauging whether there's any appetite to have a disclosure threshold for the benefit. It's not being proposed, is it, Martin?
Not outrightly, it's just something we're querying. The intent really is to, where you've got the situation of someone helping out at the canteen, for the example given earlier, where they might get a pie and a drink or something like that. We can talk about aggregate pies and drinks over a year or something like that, but it's a question of whether there needs to be reporting, or whether that needs to be recorded and reported to the AGM, and how we might determine at what point it should be. whether a threshold is an appropriate means of doing that.
And that threshold could be the aggregate threshold over a year or a threshold for individual benefit.
I mean, we're open to how the threshold works, but yes, it's basically trying to make sure that very small benefits of a very trivial nature don't burden associations with reporting requirements.
We've got a comment there. Perhaps the aggregate reporting could be broken up into benefit type. For example, 2,000 paid in benefits consisting of meals and conference tickets. We've got a question is, should it be proportionate to the size of the entity? Anyone want to take that question on? Their thoughts?
It might be better for there is in the discussion paper.
So that's something that if you're putting in a submission to consider, that might be an option that you could put in. Thank you for that, those questions and those comments. I'm now going to hand over to Myles, Emeritus Professor Myles McGregor-Lowndes, who is going to look at the topic of related party transactions. Thanks, Myles.
Thank you. Okay, this is page 8 in the consultation paper, and it's headed Related Party Transactions. But I guess it ought not to be confused with related party transactions as per the accounting standards. The two might not match up. And of course, the charities and the ACNC use the accounting standard on related party transactions quite extensively. And that's a mystery only that accountants can understand, frankly, in my view, about what a related party is. This is far more down to earth. So the members of the management committee must ensure the prescribed details of the remuneration paid or other benefits to the following persons. So each member of the management committee, each senior or each relative of the person of a senior staff or member. So a spouse attending a conference with a management committee member would be probably trigger this provision. So it's related parties to either the senior staff or the member of the management committee. So it proposes that the association provide detail, including the identity of the management committee member or senior staff or the relative, the annual amount paid for the transaction, and what the transaction provides to the association. So I can imagine a few people are going to get in hot water if the association describes how your spouse provides a benefit to the association of also attending. It will make some interesting reading. The management committees could also state the benefits to the association. So, for example, they would be free but not obligated to disclose comparisons to the usual market rates that would apply if the services or product was sourced externally from the unrelated party, provided your tractor free to mow the grounds of the cricket pitch of the association. It would be in those sorts of arrangements. I don't know whether either of the department representatives want to add anything, any matter of clarification to this?
Sorry, I don't have anything to add, Myles.
Thanks. If there's any questions or comments, don't forget the chat box. We do have another poll question. In terms of the level of disclosure for related party transactions as presented by Myles, in your view, are those proposed, the level of disclosure, is it appropriate? So we've got about 50% say yes, that level's appropriate. A lot are not sure. So what we're now asking is, by using the text, and that's in the chat, are there any other considerations that need to be taken into account? For example, could the value of such arrangements be considered commercial in confidence? If so, are there any circumstances where a related party transaction could be disclosed without a dollar value, along with a declaration that consideration paid by the association is equivalent fair market value for the service or better than fair market value? So did you want to add anything to that, Myles, at all?
No.
Well, we might keep moving along, and I'm going to hand back to Hannah, who is going to talk about the requirements for disclosure at the association's AGM. So thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Linda. So yes, in the closing part here, we're going to discuss the proposals on how you would disclose the information to your members. Because it is a requirement of the Act that it must be disclosed at the association's AGM. So there are two key options that are presented in the consultation paper. One is the inclusion of the information in the annual financial report. And this does, though, give some complexity if the incorporated association doesn't have a Office of Fair Trading reporting obligation. And so that would cover around 12% of Queensland's incorporated associations that are charities registered with the ACNC. And so for some of those smaller charities, they would only be required to do the annual information statement, which only has limited information and it's collected and published on the charity register. So for those circumstances, another proposal is that there be a separate statement of remuneration and benefits. So we're going to head on to the next slide to sort of look at the pros and cons of each of these approaches. So if we look at firstly at the disclosure within the financial report, the perceived advantages here would be that it leverages an existing reporting requirement. So associations are already producing financial reports and they need to present those to the AGM, so it streamlines the conduct in that you would only need to have one item to consider both of these things. Also, anything that is within the financial report would form part of a review or an audit that is conducted by an external verification process, so by someone like me. I guess the downside we've already covered a little in that there would be some that wouldn't be captured by this, so we need a mechanism for them to do it. And also, over time, financial reports have become quite lengthy with a lot of disclosures and content, and so there is a chance that it is more obscured in those lengthy documents and might sort of be hidden at the back a little. If we have a look then at the next slide, this is the pros and cons of a separate statement of remuneration and benefits. And so this would be a mechanism for those small ACNC reporters to report to members. And it really does give prominent focus to the subject matter. So this would be similar to the profile, I guess, that listed companies get in their remuneration report. However, it would be an additional compliance obligation, something that they haven't needed to do before. And it wouldn't form part of the standard lodgement requirements with the OFT. And so I guess would have a higher chance of being accidentally overlooked. One thing that would also need to be addressed if it was a separate statement is whether that report would require an independent audit or review being conducted, because it would be outside the general financial reporting process. On the final slide then, there is a need to disclose where there are no remuneration and benefits, and we know that this is likely to cover the majority of particularly small incorporated associations. Two of the options that are being considered or were considered in the consultation paper is a formal statement or declaration that no remuneration or benefits were received by or paid to those three categories of person, or a verbal statement which would then be documented in the association's AGM minutes each year. Again, the verbal statement can be overlooked, I guess, more easily, so there might be some merit in the formal statement, and a similar situation exists currently for those organisations regulated by the Registered Organisations Commission, where there's a series of no or negative statements that you include if you don't have that particular set of circumstances. Back to you, Linda.
Thank you, Hannah. Again, if there's any questions, just pop them in the chat. We've got some more poll questions that target our thoughts on the questions from the consultation paper and posed by Hannah. So Wendy, if we start off with poll 8, the question is it appropriate for associations to have the option of making the necessary disclosure either within their annual financial statement or in a separate statement of remuneration and benefits? So this is the question about the appropriateness of giving an association an option. The next poll is, if the disclosure is made in a separate statement of remuneration and benefits, should the statement be subject to the same level of external professional verification and audit or review that would apply to the association's financial report under the Associations and Corporations Act? So we've got poll 9 coming up. Oh, yeah. So that would be more work for you, Hannah.
It would be, if I could just make a comment, I guess, that it is, it's particularly the benefits side, not so much when you have or have not paid, when you have paid something, especially if it's a nominal amount, but it's really hard for auditors, I guess, to know when you provided a facility without a charge. The things that aren't there are the hard ones. And having the right records to track that will be really imperative to get these over the line.
Okay, next. Thank you, everyone. That was
we've got a range of polls now.
Yes, and the next one is, should management committees be required to make a formal statement or declaration that no remuneration or benefits were received by or paid to relevant persons? And that formal statement would be at the AGM. That's correct, Hannah?
I think poll 10 is whether you should make a formal statement, perhaps in your financial report, or maybe a blank, basically, statement of remuneration and benefits. There is another poll which is, could the option be verbally at the AGM?
Yes, okay. So this one is whether, so I guess it's poll 10 and poll 11 together, so should it be the formal statement, yes or no, or the second one is, could the statement be received or given verbally? That's the end of the questions that relate to the discussion paper. We've still got a few minutes, so if anyone has a question or comment they wanted to make, then please put it in the text in the chat box. Myles, is there anything you wanted to say just in summing up for today's webinar?
Yeah, I'd just make 2 points. I think we're going to see a lot of internal disputes about dissatisfied members who complain that full disclosure has not been made on some minor benefit. They saw so-and-so taking the association's lawnmower home to mow their lawn when their mower was broken. So I think it'd be a fruitful ground for disputes, but that's going to happen anyway. Secondly, there's been a trend that I've noticed. I'm not sure whether it's statistically proven, but there's a trend to having the membership the same as the management committee members. So if you just have 7 management committee members, you only have 7 members. And lawyers would advise this because it cuts down all sorts of problems with having a membership and having to have meetings and being able to control power and in the association and the like. And I can see these provisions driving more of that sort of behaviour where the members are the management committee and there's just a few members. And what they do is they have lots of volunteers who are happy to volunteer and be treated as if they were members, but they're not formally members. And I think that's probably not quite in the spirit of what the Associations Act was based upon, because it was based upon the democracy of the members holding the management committee to account annually and to having the power of the ballot box to elect or not to elect them. So I think this may well exacerbate that growing problem, but that's purely speculation on my behalf. I'd be interested in any comments in the check box about whether people think that may be a trend we'll see in the future.
Thank you, Myles. While we're waiting for people to gather thoughts, can I just thank all our panellists today, your good self, Myles, Hannah and Jackie, for your insight, expertise, and also giving us all a focus on what is really quite complex issues to get your head around. You've made it very clear to understand what issues need to think about and how that can help the department sort of look at how they're drafting the regulation. And Wendy, thank you. Pleasure. For assisting today.
I'm not going to become a bellwether.
We have a final feedback poll here to help us here at ACPNS on how likely it is that you would recommend a recording of this webinar to a colleague. If you could answer that for us, very grateful. But before we go, we do have a couple of minutes if anyone does have questions or feedback at all. I did see in the chat some feedback for the department that you need to be mindful that these are complex issues and that it would be really helpful for your office to provide good guides on how the regulation will apply. Martin and David, did you want to add anything to that at all?
Thanks, Linda. Firstly, can I just thank QUT for staging the webinars and also thank all of the speakers. It's been excellent listening to the discussion. From the point of view, just to take your point, Linda, on guides, certainly the Office of Fair Trading will, to the extent that the regulations need some guidance underneath them, that will also be a task that we will have to turn our minds to. In the first instance, though, we're very conscious of the nuance that's needed in this particular regulation, and this has been very encouraging because I can see that people are turning their minds to, well, this might work for a certain size entity but not for others, and I would encourage everyone to draw our attention to that every single time you think it ought to be drawn to our attention, because it helps us no end that we're constantly reminded that particularly in our jurisdiction, one size does not fit all. We're a decentralised state where we have incorporated associations that are extraordinarily diverse both in character and in size, and it augurs well for a better regulation if we're constantly reminded by our stakeholders that this might work over here but it doesn't work here. So I thank everybody for their input and look forward to tomorrow's webinar.
Thank you, David. And on that note, can I encourage everyone to join us again tomorrow, where we're looking at reporting thresholds, and there's discussion paper 3, which is available if you don't already have it. I think we've sent it out with the link with the invitation, and encourage as many as your colleagues and people you know in the sector to join tomorrow's webinar. Please share the link that you have to join us, so that we can sort of get as many involved as possible. Wendy, did you want to, any final words as we wrap up today?
No, I would just like to thank everyone for their support of this, and always their support of ACPNS. You would have seen the 21 years down at the bottom there. So Myles was, but a boy when he founded the centre. But in any case, we hope that the information is useful. We're here for knowledge impact for a better world. So we hope that you actually access the range of resources that are available freely from the centre. I would also just very quickly say we are so proud of our alumni, Jackie and Hannah, and our other alumni speaking across this series. Myles set up the course to really create good leaders in our sector and confident operators. So well done, Myles. I think the proof's in the pudding, and thank you all once again for joining us.
And the link to the recording will be made available as well. So thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow.